All right, we are live. Sachin, thank you so much for joining us.
Excited to be here.
Welcome, welcome.
We've been really excited for this chat. I think one of the things that we have been hearing a lot, and it sounds like you have been as well, is just the importance of taste. And you've been a product leader at really big companies like LinkedIn. You're a founder. You teach courses to people that are really looking to level up right now, and as product managers, and figure out how to adopt these latest AI tools to become better and higher leverage PMs. And it sounds like, given our different perspectives, one of the things we're just hearing a lot is like taste is going to be everything. Does anything bother you about the way that the kind of public narrative is currently shaping up around the importance of taste and what it means?
Definitely. I think what's so interesting about it is I could probably point you to a dozen tweets that go something along the lines of AI is getting so good at taking over so many of the core responsibilities of the product role. Eventually AI is going to be writing our specs. AI is going to be coming up with our product strategy. AI is going to be coming up with our prototypes, right? And with where this is all going, the narrative goes, the only thing that's going to matter is taste, your product taste. That's the thing that's going to matter. Now, I take two issues with this. First, most of those conversations start and end with that. Okay, great. If taste is going to become so important, how do I improve my taste? What does it taste even mean? Like, most people, when they think of taste, they're thinking of aesthetic taste, right? But that's not really the full conversation, especially in the product role. And so I feel like there's a lot of dialogue missing in where taste is going and how do you even improve your taste. Now,
yeah, what does taste mean to you though? Like if you you're a very creative product guy. You strike me as extremely customer centric, customer empathetic, and like, so what does taste mean to you? Have you landed any like definitions that are useful?
I've thought a lot about this, and the simplest definition I've found is taste is your ability to recognize high quality work when you see it. It's this idea that you can see and discern and judge the work that you're looking at as high quality. And in the product realm, that's not just taste when it comes to, does it look beautiful? Is it a delightful design? Is it a pleasing design? But it's things like, is that a compelling product strategy? Is this product strategy likely to work in the market? Is it likely to win and differentiate itself against competitors? That's high quality work that if you have taste, you're able to recognize. It's even things like, is this a important problem to solve for a customer? It takes taste to know. And that comes from deep understanding your customers and whatnot. But that's what I've been able to simplify it to, which is this idea of recognizing high quality work when you see it.
Game recognize game.
Like, yes.
Exactly. Kind of side note, every time I think about taste, the picture of Rick Rubin closing his eyes and like being like, like I get paid to like basically for my taste. Like that's the thing that comes to mind anytime I hear the word taste. Now, do you think there's a difference between judgment and taste, or do you see them as like the same thing?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there's a couple of different words that are now like kind of all around the same idea. Judgment, taste, product sense even comes up in this sense.
Intuition, discernment.
Product intuition. Yeah. And so I think all of these are kind of around the same idea. I'd say the broader idea that all of these sort of incorporate is this idea that, look, as a product person, you need to be able to basically make good product decisions in the absence of data, right? You're going to have to make calls all day long without data. And I think that's sort of the lens of product intuition. And you sort of get that with product judgment as well. Now, each of these have slightly different connotations. I think oftentimes when people are talking about product taste, they are talking about how do you make a delightful experience? How do you create an emotional reaction from your customers? How do you create really high quality work relative to just something that's going to meet your business goals? But I do think a lot of these terms sort of get at this idea of like, hey, look, are you able to predict what the customer is going to do with a given experience? Because you know it's high quality or not.
Let's assume that I'm I'm about to graduate from college, and I know I want to get into product. And, I keep seeing this tweets of, all that's going to matter is product taste. And you're just getting nervous because of like, ooh, like, do I have it? Do I not have it? If you were going to design like maybe like a month or like a 2-week like class of like, be like, hey, like if you do these things, like this is how we'll get started to start to develop that taste. Like what would that kind of curriculum or homework or assignment look like?
Yeah, I think what's so interesting about this is when most people wrote those tweets, they're thinking about the future. Like, oh, look, eventually when AI takes over all these core responsibilities of product managers, then taste is really going to matter. But actually, taste matters right now, like literally this minute. And here's why. We have this whole thing happening with AI, which everyone refers to as AI slop. And it's very real. And here's the problem. We are using AI tools not just to produce great work, but in fact, oftentimes we're using it to save time. That actually, a lot of folks are getting efficiency gains from AI, but actually at the cost of quality. And so I don't think we talk enough about this because we talk so much about the promise of AI, how AI is kind of amazing. But let me just give you a few examples here that are top of mind. First one, I was talking to a professor at a top 10 university. And she told me the other day that she knows that about at least 40% of people in her class use AI to write their essays. And this is a top 10 university. And so they're using AI to basically write the entire essay, at least 40%. And I'm like, how can you tell? And she's like, look, they are solid B essays. I'm like, what does that mean? And she's like, look, they're incredible English. They have 0 grammatical errors. They're incredibly well structured. I can't give them any dings on those. So that's why it's a solid B essay. And then I'm like, why isn't it a solid A essay? And they're like, no novel insights, no strong opinions, not a single thing that breaks conventional wisdom. And that's why it will never be an A essay. And so it was sort of this really interesting reflection of this idea. It lacked taste. It was great English. It was well written, but that essay lacked taste. And I think what's happening now is when we don't use these AI tools well, when we don't use them with taste, we get that kind of output. I think you might have seen something like this as well, where a bunch of senior developers are now complaining that AI in the hands of junior devs creates code slop, right? It's just low quality code. And then the senior developer feels like they have to clean it up. This is unmaintainable code because they basically vibe code instead of actually doing real engineering. And you get to low quality work in that sense as well. I think the third example I'd offer is, man, this is like really bugging me, landing pages. I'm seeing a bunch of people use tools like all the AI prototyping tools to create landing pages. But when you give it a generic prompt, like create me a landing page for X, you get an incredibly generic landing page. It uses Tailwind templates, probably by default purple primary color, interfont, and the layout looks exactly the same. And the thing that worries me is like, man, you would have been better off using a traditional website builder like Webflow or Squarespace or any of these things and gotten at least a differentiated design. And so I think what we're seeing is this idea that if we use these tools without taste, we get low quality work. And that's not tomorrow, that's today. And that's something why taste really matters. I don't know, do you guys have any examples of AI slop?
I mean, mostly I'm seeing it in writing these days. Yeah. Like when I'm scrolling LinkedIn and I see posts that are, Mark and I talk all the time about the trade-off that content creators need to make right now, which is, basically the trade-off between like it takes time to create high quality content. So it's like, do you want the efficiency gains of using AI to your point and then get the benefits associated with consistency? Or do you want to, go for the quality side of things and maybe post less often or incur the opportunity cost of taking the extra time to craft the posts? And I think for everyone, it depends on what game they're playing. Like, I think if I'm trying to test demand for a new offering in the market and I can vibe code my way to a generic landing page that has the right, hero and the right unique content, even though people might tell I used AI to vibe code it, I don't think I get a lot of extra points for like winning on originality of website design and differentiation. It's about the content. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's just about the people's goals and the trade-offs that they're willing to accept, because there's no solution with no trade-offs. But Mark, I'm curious what you think.
I think there's like also just different dimensions where taste is applicable, right? So for example, like my biggest dilemma of lately is my LinkedIn content. So there's a lot of different dimensions where I could apply taste, and I could be very like, if you will, crafty or like, do it all by hand and be very human. One is like the topic selection, right? The other one's like the hook, and then the other one's like the actual like content and the grammar, etc. And where I've landed lately for my LinkedIn posts is that like the highest leverage point for me is to apply my taste on what I think is top of mind for product leaders. And a topic that's like relevant, top of mind, maybe like edgy, a little bit like a strong opinion. And then after I have that, then using AI to kind of craft the post. And it's tough because I think, the people that know me, and probably a good amount of people can tell, like, hey, so some of your posts are clearly written by AI. But I think there's still some value there, and I think there's also like value in volume. So I go back and forth, but I think in an ideal world, if you had infinite time, you would do all by hand and with good taste. But I think that's the hard part now, that you have to also have taste at the like meta level of like where are you spending your time. And I was like, I think that's like a fair trade-off based on where what my goals are. So that's.
I love that example. I love that example because what you're getting to is the importance of figuring out which levers in the machine or which levers in the equation are the ones that have the highest unique contribution, like unique human contribution that you can bring to the table, and making sure you don't use AI to replace those, but using AI to supercharge the parts that are maybe like the less Mark's like totally unique insight part of it.
And I think maybe like the part that I didn't share is, okay, like English is not my first language. I wouldn't consider myself like a poet, right? Like I can write, I took a good amount of English classes, but I think my unique kind of quote unquote gift or superpower is that I run this community of product leaders, and I get like this constant insights and stream of information, and then I'm able to really like distill like the signal from the noise and be like, okay, that's actually what's in, like a topic that's very interesting that maybe there's not enough perspectives out there. So yeah, I think that's just kind of that dance is pretty important, I think.
And I think that's actually a great example of how to use these AI tools with taste, right? Because you have a deep understanding of the customer problems that your community cares about, right? And what's top of mind for them, what's keeping them up at night, where their FOMO is and the realities of kind of their product roles. And then using that to create the germ of the interesting novel content that ultimately is going to speak to that audience. And then, using AI to clean up the English, to sort of write the prose, I think is a great example of using AI well. I think the challenge I'm seeing is there's almost desire to take AI further than what it's capable of today, right? Because you could, for example, technically you can say, okay, great. Go read my posts in my community, go find out what the top topics are, write a list of 25 topics that I should potentially create LinkedIn content around. Now, next step in my wonderful automated agent workflow is go write some drafts of that content and then, go publish them. And what's amazing is you can fully automate that. But that I would describe as using AI today without taste. And in fact, you're going to get poor output. And so we still need this idea of human in the loop that's ultimately going to help you improve the quality, because you're pointing it at great work, right? Your example here is like, I know what my community cares about because I'm living and breathing and talking to them every day in the community. And so that's the great problem and content. And then using AI to really kind of write the prose. And so I think that gets at some of these examples of how do you use taste and AI together? Because I'm a firm believer you can create high quality content with AI. You just have to know how to do it and have the taste to make it happen.
Yeah. And I'm curious, like you clearly are like hyper aware of like taste is very important. Like it is a skill set that is likely going to become more and more valuable. Like how do you, I think there's parts of our, like for example, like our superpowers, like probably like our taste is like very refined. Like it's like almost like kind of at the top, like 1%, right? If you're really good at something, but then there's other elements where maybe your taste is not, it's good but not amazing. Like how do you refine, like let's say for example like product design, right? Like how do you like think about building more taste in that particular area? Is it more around like just making sure you're consuming like really high quality stuff? Is it about like kind of like building that empathy and starting to trying to break down and decompose like different decisions that you think the designers have made? Like how do you think about that taste building?
Yeah, I think there's two unique insights that I've come across that have ultimately guide how I think about how do you build taste. The first one comes from Rick Rubin. Many of you probably know Rick Rubin. For those who don't, he's a legendary producer for some of my favorite artists, Linkin Park, Adele, and so many other artists. And a few years back, he wrote this incredible book called The Creative Act that really gets at taste and building taste and creativity and where that comes from. And so as a disciple of Rick Rubin, like his core insight is creativity does not come from original thought. And there's sort of this preconceived notion that like creativity is that spur of the moment idea that comes to you in the middle of the night, right? Or in the shower. And that's like creativity. And what Rick Rubin says is actually, no, creativity comes from the source material that you experience every day. That your creativity is based on your lived experience of what you've consumed. And that is something we want to think about and amplify. And so Rick Rubin himself offers two ways to do it. The first is what he calls increasing your sensitivity to the world around you. And so it's this idea that he argues that artists aren't like more creative, they're just more sensitive, that they actually experience the world more deeply. They understand it more deeply than most of us, and they perceive it. And so he talks about increasing your aperture of what you see. And so the point is that, it's an example of like, everyone talks about how Taylor Swift is an incredible lyricist. And some people are shocked, like, wow, when she was really young, she'd write these incredible stories about heartbreak. And you're like, how much heartbreak has she really experienced? Not that much, but she could live through other people's experience and tell it in the most choiceful prose ever. And that's an example of her having increased sensitivity to the dynamics of human relationship and observing it in a way and being able to craft the prose around it. And so when he talks about, let's relate it to something like product design or the world that we're in. It's this idea that you go around the world doing a design critique around everything that you experience, right? We're using an app called Riverside right now. And I'm sitting here thinking, wow, there's so many reasons I love this better than Zoom. The video quality looks a lot better. I'm seeing, us all side by side in a really interesting view. And now I'm thinking about all the differences between, something like Zoom I use every day and Riverside. And that's an example of I'm just increasing my aperture every minute by doing these sort of design critiques, kind of just with the tools I'm using all day long. And so that's the first thing he recommends us do, which is this increase your aperture, do sort of effectively design critiques.
And
now,
for these design critiques, for example, like, do you think it's important to do it from the perspective of like, I'm the PM at Riverside and I'm trying to understand why they've made the choices they've made, and like why they went one direction versus the other? Or is it also around like putting yourself as a user and starting to build an opinion of like, oh, like I like this, but like why, right? Like,
I like to flip those personally. So I always like to start from the perspective of what do I feel as a user of a product. And so, for example, like, why am I enjoying using this product right now? Or what's bugging me about this product? And then asking myself, what decision must they have made to make it so? And what maybe trade-off, what might have been associated with that? That's nowadays what I ask myself. For example, the most common thing that the most common instantiation of this is like, there's so many new tools now. So a lot of us are going through onboarding flows where we're setting up new tools. And I think onboarding flows are really good examples of times where you could attune yourself to how you feel about the friction of starting with a new tool. And some onboarding flows, for example, will ask you like some questions in the onboarding flow, and some of them will make it optional and they let you skip. And then some of them make it mandatory and they don't let you skip and they require you to do it. And when I can't skip, I always ask myself, why are they asking me this question right now? And can I connect the dots in my head between what I put into this and what I might expect to get as a user of this product? That's an example of like thinking, almost like deconstructing the product thinking that went into it, to the point where I will say, if I have to ask myself the question of why are they asking me about this, it's probably in the category of bad taste in my head, or like not great taste. But if it's obvious why they're asking me that question, because it's clearly on the path to getting me this amazing thing that I want to get, then it's like, great, I'm excited to give them this information that they're asking me about. So like, ask yourself, how do you feel about these inputs that you have to put into different products to get some kind of output on the other side of it, is a great way to, that I like to kind of try to develop my taste personally. But yeah, I'm curious, Sachin, if you have any reactions to that, slash if you wanted to go in a different direction to what Mark was asking.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. That I think this idea of put yourself in the user's head, because you are the user, you are experiencing that product, you are having an emotional reaction to an onboarding screen, right? Why can't I skip this, for example? I think listening to yourself, your inner monologue as you're going through those experiences is really useful. And, it turns out some people are like this. They're just constantly dissatisfied with the products they use every day. It's actually a great mentality to have, because you're thinking about what could have been better, what could be improved. And I think part of it is also having this viewpoint where, not that I did something wrong, but if something was not great in the user experience, it was probably the design of the user experience, right? If I'm looking at this and being like, this is hard to use, they probably designed it poorly. Maybe there's something we could have done better to remove, make it more intuitive, make it easier to use. And so I think that mentality is something that also has to be cultivated, because it's easy to be like, oh, I made a mistake, let me just go do the right thing. But actually thinking about, well, maybe they designed it poorly that led to my mistake, and it's not my fault at all.
Yeah, I think there's a thing I think Scott Belsky talks about. I'm sure other people talk about it too, but he's the one I'm thinking of right now, which is like, when you're using a product. By the way, I would say Scott, founder of Behance, like was a product executive at Adobe. I'd say he's arguably one of the people who's known for having really good taste, I think, in the product world. And I think one of the things he talks about is how every part of your experience, users should understand where they came from. So like how they got there, where they are, and where they can go. And I think that when I find myself frustrated with products, it's when one of those questions is not clear. I don't know where I am. I don't know how I got here. I don't know where I go from here. And so I think maintaining that kind of story in one's head as you use a product, I think is always also a really good heuristic. And one thing I'll double click on that you said, Sachin, which is like, a lot of people, it's a good quality to like be the kind of person that gets very frustrated with products, or gets, kind of like, it's like, this sucks, like, and what I would say is like, I would say, and if you can be the kind of person that's like very sensitive to what sucks about an experience, but also get really good at pinpointing specifically what it is about that experience that sucks, or that can make the entire world of difference between being just like a complainer versus being an extremely savvy kind of product critiquer.
And I think totally. The best founders have that, right? Like you think about like Steve Jobs or Brian Belsky, like they all like are like, okay, like this could be better. Like they will always find something that's not great, but at the same time they'll have a vision, they'll know and have exactly the answer why what would make this from a 7 to a 10, which is really cool.
I'll give you an example right now. Like we're on this like Riverside products, and one of the things that I know, having recorded almost 100 episodes at this point with Mark, is that Mark is the admin of the Riverside session. So Mark sees our inputs and outputs in our devices, and so if a guest ever has volume that's too high, or Mark's volume is too high, and I need to rebalance, as a guest, I have no control over the volume with which I hear a given guest on this podcast, which feels to me like a frustrating experience. So what's the trade-off decision that they've made? The trade-off decision they've made is, we want to have one person control all of the volumes for the episode. We do not want to let individual guests have any control over the volume of other people on the episode. We want to leave that all to the admin, right? That's the trade-off they made. Given that most podcasts have 2, maybe 3 guests on them, and they're generally conversations between peers, I would expect the Riverside team to maybe treat the guest as an equal member of the conversation, and give them the same kind of level over the control of the volume. So that would be my critique of that decision.
And then I think to take it a level deeper, then I would ask, like, I wonder why they haven't made that decision. Like, what were maybe the decisions that they were faced with? What were the trade-offs of each of those decisions? And then maybe, can I pinpoint the reason why they went that way that I might have missed? I think that's like...
I think there's an assumption that the admin or the person who's in your shoes is the one who's kind of carrying the editorial responsibility for the full life cycle of what happens with this conversation, and therefore they should have full controls, and the guest should be a second tier citizen and like the permission structure, right?
That could be an option. And the other option could be like there's some technical limitations where actually like the controls are controlled at the global level. You cannot control at the local level how different people's volumes, right? So then it's like if you modify the volume of how you hear it, you're modifying it for everyone else. And then you'll just end up in these like kind of, mouse and cat dynamics where you're muting me and then I'm muting Ben.
But the solution to that could have been to just put a little, like, if I hover over any tile, there's a little like output volume controller, which just lets me, and it's just for me. It doesn't change anything at the global settings level. And it's hard for me to imagine there's no technical ability to like that would be like a very hard technical problem, but I'm sure there's a senior engineer at Riverside listening to this that's like, Ben, if you only knew all this shit I have to deal with. So yeah.
I mean, I think the main thing I love about this conversation is like, if you just think about it, we just got additional reps on thinking through product challenges without it being related to our product. Now, of course, we have these conversations all day long about our own products that we're building. But the point is when you're attempting to build taste, the fact that you can get these additional reps on other people's products is what helps build that intuition. And
the other thing that I thought was really interesting recently is Mark and I were putting together this guide for insider loops around Stripe's process, and they have a take-home assignment that has people critique the onboarding flow for which was it, Atlas? It was one of Stripe's products.
I think their checkout product.
The checkout process, sorry, that's what it was. And one of the things we gathered from multiple people at Stripe is that they actually view copywriting and content writing, content design as a form of real product decisions, just like traditional product design. So the other thing I would say is especially in the era of AI slop, the words that you see on these pages and of these websites that you use are super, super important. And that's one of the other things I generally do is I ask myself, like, why did they choose these words? And were these words the right words to tell me what I need to know about where I am in this experience, not just like the levers.
Totally. Yeah, and I think the next place I wanted to take this conversation was into the second piece of advice from Rick Rubin on how to build taste.
Yeah, and sorry for that tangent.
No, it's great. We went really deep on Rick Rubin's first piece of advice.
We all became way more sensitive.
Oh yes.
What was the second piece of advice from Rick Rubin?
So this one was fascinating. He said your job, once you've increased your sensitivity, is to consume the canon of the great work in your domain. And so he's like, if you're a movie producer, you better watch all the top movies that have ever been produced. If you are an artist who's singing or creating music, you better listen to all the top music that's ever existed. And with the combination of increased sensitivity and consumption of the canon of great work, you start to build a deep understanding of what great looks like. And I remember reading this book, and this book, as I mentioned, was so impactful to me that I'd gotten really into biking at the time. And I love music, but I've been always sort of a casual music person. And so I'm like, I'm going to take Rick Rubin's advice to heart. And so what I did was I went to Billboard. They produce a list of the top 100 albums ever produced, going through all of history. And you can go through it. You know, it's got everything from Michael Jackson to Madonna to Taylor Swift to like the whole range, right? And so I started doing my bike rides, and I would just literally listen on Spotify from first album all the way through, second album all the way through. And I get through a lot because I'm doing these 20 to 30 mile bike rides. And so I literally 1 year listened to all 100 albums. And man, I have so much appreciation for different styles of music. There was artists that I thought I knew, but I only had heard their one or two songs that made singles, but I'd never really consumed the entire thing. And then the stories that they tell through, it's a lost art, but what used to be the thing is that they would think strategically about the 12 songs on the album, the ordering of it, and the story that's being told across it. And yeah, it was such a amazing way to really embrace his philosophy. And now I've done the same thing for product, right? And so like when you think about it, what is the canon of great work for product? And so I think there's many ways we should think about this. I think about it in a couple. First, it's like, let's talk about product design. Apple gives awards every year to the best designed apps, right? And so it's really useful to go through those and start to understand, why does Apple think these apps are so well designed? What's so great about Duolingo, which won one year, or these other apps, right? And that's one way I think about building it. Another way is this idea of like, I want to read all the greats who write about product, the greatest product thinkers, right? And you mentioned Scott Belsky. I read every one of his essays because he's one of these great product thinkers. Jeff Bezos has written every one of the shareholder letters for the company, and it's some of the best business writing that exists out there. And so there's so much good stuff to consume. And then I was just looking, a couple of years ago while doing this, I even produced this top 100 resources for product managers, which is just the top 100 things I think have been written on product. Everything from example vision narratives from Peter Thiel and Sergey Brin to great examples of product strategies that have been written. And I think that's this idea that Rick Rubin's talking about. When we go through and like consume the great work, we get really good at this, at understanding what great looks like.
Yeah, it's almost like your media diet in a way. And I think media diet is another one great way to do that. I think the other, especially if you're early in your career, like I think something that's probably really important too is like choosing the right company to join. Because I think like when there's a lot of really good talent, and I think like probably a common thing in tech companies that are doing really well, like everyone in that company has good taste. And I think just getting exposed to those good decisions over and over again, especially early in your career, and setting that bar, right? Because then that's also being like, yeah, that's what good looks like. So I don't want to go anything lower than that. It's kind of back to what you were saying of like, just it almost like raises your ceiling of what it's acceptable, which I think can just only do good things for you and your career.
Yeah, I mean, I think I like that. I like that addition, Mark. Taste. I mean, I think what three of us would agree on is probably taste is something you develop. You probably have some maybe some people are more sensitive out of the box than other people, and they can develop sensitivities. But assuming taste is something that develops, I mean, that's definitely true for me. I think my taste now is way better than it used to be. It's not something I was like born with or anything. I think what happens in these like incredibly talent dense companies that you're talking about that do incredibly high quality product work is that there's something about the culture that almost like magnifies that co-creation of taste. So it's like it's almost like everyone's taste is leveling up in parallel because there's something happening about the way that they pressure test each other's assumptions, the way that they work together that results in an elevated sense of taste, so that when they leave that company and you're looking at their resume, you're like, wow, that person comes from whatever, Airbnb, or they must have like a great design taste or something like that. But I don't know if everyone that goes into those companies comes in with like that taste. So there's something about the culture. So I do think sometimes about the importance of almost like, can you have a company that has great taste where the leaders don't have great taste? Or do you think that's one of those things that like people have to model from a leader? I'm curious what you guys think about that. Because Brian Chesky is obviously like a designer from his by training. Steve Jobs was arguably the most high taste, and Johnny Ive, like high taste people like at Apple. But even Johnny Ive says that Steve Jobs used to tell him he would bring shit work to him for like reviews, be like, Johnny, you could do better than this. This is not good. So like obviously Steve was holding the bar even for Johnny Ive on like the taste side.
I think leadership matters a ton when it comes to taste. And in fact, I actually think that the way that this often manifests is through executive reviews. And for example, I argue that Amazon has some of the best taste when it comes to product strategy. Certainly not product design, but product strategy. And part of that is because of the 6-page narrative memo, the reviews that Bezos used to run around these memos, that everyone would sit quietly, read the memo. There was no presentations allowed. And then the level of conversation and debate on the merits of the memo in front of us resulted in everyone improving their strategic thinking. And that's why Amazon has had just so many successful businesses, right? Like AWS out of left field for an e-commerce company that has been wildly successful. And even just going from a straight e-commerce to a marketplace. And then even things like Kindle, right? Like it's not obvious that they would be the number one e-reader. Now in hindsight, you're like, okay, yeah, that maybe that makes sense. But they've had so many disparate wins from a product strategy perspective. And I think part of it was that review process that Bezos insisted on. And you hear about it, and Bezos is just as crazy as Steve Jobs was, right? Steve created his own executive review format. His was a design review where he doesn't want to read any docs. He wants to see the design. Every single screen, every single pixel, he's going to point out what animations are terrible in that experience. And that was the way he brought design taste to the experience through that review process.
There's a book I love about that, by the way. It's called Creative Destruction? God, I got to find the name for it. But it was written by the guy. Creative Selection. That's what it was. Thank you. It was by the guy who I believe was tasked with creating the iPhone keyboard, which was going to be the first keyboard. Like at the time, everyone was using Blackberries and like click, 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 click. And this guy's job was to figure out how to come up with a keyboard that would fit on the iPhone, the very first iPhone. And he talks about these. That you're right. It was literally Steve coming over. You show the different directions. How does it feel? You don't get to even go huddle with someone else after that. They had literally one guy doing the whole thing. He was like the engineer and the designer and the PM on this thing, all on his own. And so, yeah, that's fascinating. So I didn't mean to interrupt you, but it's so interesting how literally the preferences of the founder CEO or the preferences of the CEO shape the way in which taste even gets manifested through reviews.
Yeah. Totally. And like, guess what? Guess who Steve Jobs promotes into executive leadership at Apple? The people in those meetings that give good, tasteful feedback. And Apple Johnny. Is one of these. Yeah, exactly, Johnny. And but so many of the other execs. And I think the interesting thing you hear about is in so many organizations, that's not required. You don't have to be a phenomenal world-class designer to be a VP, right? That's just not a required thing. But at Apple, it was required. And that was one of the core ingredients. Design taste for a senior executive was Steve Jobs' bar. And it results in a very different focus and a very different leadership. And I think this happens, like we've talked about strategy, taste, design taste. There's a whole set of companies that are known for metrics taste, right? Like Zynga being kind of the DoorDash, LinkedIn in many ways, SurveyMonkey, these sort of organizations where there's a leader. Let's take Zynga. Mark Pincus was a metric-oriented beast, like a beast. And what's amazing about it is you looked at gaming prior to what Zynga was able to do, and people would create a game for fun, but they weren't using metrics to funnel users through workflows, and they weren't using metrics to design the game mechanic to optimize for what they wanted, which was, ultimately buying more currency in their platform. And I talked to people at Zynga, and they're like, yeah, the reviews were so metric oriented. If you didn't know your way around a spreadsheet, man, you could not survive in that organization. And so everyone has their own version of taste. And I think this is important because it's not just design taste. I think too many people simplify this to design as the only form of taste.
Yeah.
If you're enjoying this conversation, please check out the links in the show notes to support the podcast. Mark and I do this out of love, but to keep it going, we also need your support. Thanks. And now back to the episode.
Where my head's going is people should think more about in what dimension they want to improve their taste. Because what my head is going at is like, okay, like I think the people that grow fastest in their career, they're early at discovering what their superpower is. And then they double down on that superpower. And then they're able to really quickly amplify their impact because they know, hey, here's what I'm good at. And then they also maybe find the places that values that superpower, right? And so it almost sounds like you have an intuition, be like, hey, I really like design, or I think I have a gift for it. And maybe choosing a founder that also values that, well, it's probably going to be very career additive versus maybe joining a place like DoorDash or Zynga, where actually like, it doesn't matter how good the design is. If we run an A/B test and it tells me that this ugly ass button that's purple and in the middle is going to drive, 50x more purchases, we're going to go with that, right? So I think that's like just a connection that I'm making of like maybe it's important to be intentional about like which kind of part of taste you want to develop.
Totally. I talk about this in an essay I wrote about like product culture fit, which is this idea of you want to be strategic about the fact that every company has a different product culture. We've just talked about a strategy-driven culture, a design-driven culture, and a metric-driven culture. The last one I talk about in the essay is actually a sales-driven culture, something like a Salesforce or many of the enterprise companies. And you want to be thoughtful about that. Like early on in your career, it's probably useful to explore a couple of different cultures to find out where do you resonate, right? Like I've seen organ rejection in organizations that are metrics driven, but you're a design driven person at heart. And unfortunately, when you're metrics driven, you make design trade-offs that won't really speak to you. But like trying a couple of those modalities to figure out where your fit is. And then ultimately you enter the that's explore phase, then the exploit phase, which is like, hey man, I'm really a metrics driven person or a design oriented person. Let me only pick organizations where I can thrive and excel based on the type of culture or type of taste that I resonate with as well.
When you were at LinkedIn, what do you think their taste culture was kind of like oriented towards?
I'd say metrics oriented. And it comes down to, we had this incredible CEO, Jeff Weiner, that was a truly deeply metrics oriented guy. And we had two reviews in the company. Kind of the consumer side businesses would meet every week in what was called an engagement meeting. And they talk about how all of the businesses are doing from an engagement perspective. And then we'd also have on the monetization side, a weekly monetization meeting where we talk about the P&Ls of all the major businesses. And the thing that was amazing is I'd sit in these meetings, and I was running the LinkedIn Sales Navigator business at the time. And you just see Jeff poring over metrics and being like, why are we seeing a week over week compression in this metric starting in week 4? And he's seeing things that the GM of the business didn't even see, because he's so attuned to looking at data and deriving insights from it. Now, that resulted in all of us feeling the need to become very metric oriented as well. And I think what served LinkedIn well from that orientation was, man, here's a company so focused on operational metrics that everything scaled, user base scaled, engagement scaled, viral email scaled, and they were all optimized so incredibly well. Now, of course, a metric-oriented organization does have its drawbacks. You wouldn't necessarily say LinkedIn's the most well-designed product, or it's not like the Airbnbs or Apples of the world, because it had a different focus. And I think that is just natural to know what kind of culture each organization has.
I'm curious to learn more specifically about maybe not like the core product craft and design of LinkedIn at that moment, but you were, I believe you were tasked. You were basically created. You were like the creator or like one of the founding team members of LinkedIn Sales Navigator, right? As a major 0 to 1 bet there. So, in a world where you're doing 0 to 1 work, do you feel like the metrics obsessed taste culture breaks at like the 0 to 1 stage, or are there ways to remain metrics obsessed and bring valid currency to leadership reviews when doing 0 to 1 work?
It's a great question. And I think it is something inherently very challenging in a metric-oriented culture to bring 0 to 1 businesses to life, because you're so used to looking at metrics. And with your scaled businesses, you can look at them at scale really often, right? Like we were looking at metrics weekly. And for the Sales Navigator business, ultimately when we scaled it, if there was a 10% miss on my forecast for weekly sales, I'd have the CFO grilling me on like, what's going on here? What happened? Like, why didn't we predict this? Why didn't we understand that? And that creates incredible operational excellence, especially for a public company, but makes it incredibly difficult to go 0 to 1 on a brand new product. And, I think what's interesting about my journey with LinkedIn is that I actually built a startup called Connected. It was a contact management tool that was acquired by LinkedIn. And so when it was first acquired by LinkedIn, we took that functionality and deeply integrated it on the LinkedIn consumer product. So this was years ago. So all those emails that you get about a job change or a birthday or someone was mentioned in the news, that was all my team that produced that and made that available on LinkedIn. And so you can go to the connections tab and manage your connections. That was everything that we'd built. Now, at the time, I kept telling them that, hey, look, when we were a young startup, we were charging for our product and our top users was sales professionals. We should go build something for sales professionals. And so eventually they're like, yeah, you're right. We make all our money off of recruiters. We should build something dedicated for sales professionals. And we'd love for you to go incubate something that's going to be a big business for sales professionals. Now, I think what was so key about my journey at LinkedIn was I had built some incredible social capital within the organization purely from taking Connected and making parts of it available in the free product, right? So we had some wins under my belt for these things like, okay, great. Like we should be sending really detailed notifications about when people in your network had a job change and all that. And, smallish wins, but like really put wins on the board. We saw meaningful engagement improvements. We saw meaningful people sending more messages to each other based on congratulating them on a job change. And so I had those wins under my belt. And now when I went to go incubate a brand new business, I could leverage that social capital a little bit and say, hey guys, if I'm going to do this, I need some rope. I need some leash. We can't do what we've done in the past, which is let a product launch 6 months later, evaluate the metrics and kill it when it doesn't meet some crazy expectations, right? I'm going to need time on this thing and I'm going to have to be given that rope to go do that. Now, I think what's challenging is that required the social capital that I had brought into this conversation. It required me telling this a narrative about why this product was a great fit for LinkedIn and why likely to be successful. We showed prototypes, actually the early day of prototyping, not AI prototypes, but the early versions, to companies, to sales teams at JP Morgan and Apple. And I'd have to bring those quotes in and show them to our execs well before we launched the product. And so I had to sort of spend a lot of time managing up leadership and making sure they were still bought off as we were taking time to launch the product. When we initially launched the product, we unfortunately had a really poor NPS because we were in a rush to get it out. So we spent 6 months just trying to get the NPS to be decent before we added any new features. And so it took a while. Now, in the end, I ultimately grew Sales Navigator to over 200 million revenue while I was there. It's now $1 billion in annual sales.
It's amazing. It's an amazing product. I see people using it all the time. I'm not a salesperson, but like Mark and I talk about, I've seen his usage of it a lot and it seems amazing.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like also like what happened there too. I mean, you have the social capital because you clearly were effective at integrating your startup, but I also think kind of why it was the perfect storm is that you also had the credibility of like, you've been a founder, you've taken something 0 to 1. And that's probably a skill set that was probably really hard to find in a company like LinkedIn, right? Because like, it's kind of like a chicken in the egg, right? In order to be really good at metrics, you need volume in order to, because otherwise you don't get stack sales. And in a way you were kind of like at the right time, at the right place, and you were the perfect person for it, which is really cool.
I remember even talking to David Hahn, was the leader of all the monetization businesses. And he had that conversation with me about, Sachin, do you want to go build this new sales subscription? And I remember telling him like, look, I'm a bit apprehensive because I've never sort of been a GM of a P&L. And, I hear the folks that are running LinkedIn Recruiter and how savvy they are with the metrics and the monetization and all that. And David, I remember telling me, Sachin, look, I can hire GMs all day long. I can't hire a 0 to 1 guy. It's just, we don't have that DNA. And so I'm willing to take a bet on you learning the GM stuff from all the incredible people we have here that are incredible operationally. But you're the one to do the 0 to 1 part. And so that sort of was the bet. He was very strategic about that from the perspective of, I want a innovator to really attempt to go build this, and we'll fill out the rest that you need to figure out to grow into, ultimately became GM of this sort of sales organization and the sales product, which was a huge learning curve from that side of it.
That's also like another manifestation of taste, right? Of like, maybe leadership is too broad of a word, but maybe like taste on like kind of the right like talent problem fit, right? Like it probably would have been way safer to hire someone that, meets all the rubrics of LinkedIn and like, has done this before and has run like a, has been a GM. But in this case, like this person had that taste of like, I think this actually is the right person, even though maybe on the outside it might look more risky, which I think is really cool.
It's almost like you want. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead, Sachin.
I was just going to say that I totally agree that hiring takes taste. And, I think part of it was this leader in particular realized that, okay, I'm bringing a founder in, and Sachin wants rope. Sachin doesn't want to be micromanaged. He doesn't want to be told what to do. He wants to run this thing. And he did. He honestly let me run it. And so the failures were my own. The successes were my own. And I think that's hard often for leaders to do.
Takes courage.
Yeah. It does. And I mean, I think like also asking for 6 months of rope is different than asking for, like 2 years of rope, for example. Also, if the pitch is compelling enough up front and it's like, look, there's no world in which LinkedIn does not have a product for salespeople. Like, we're going to crack this. Like we are going to have a product here. We don't know, we're going to figure out what the right product is, and we're going to experiment and test. But like, if you have Jeff Weiner level conviction at the CEO level that LinkedIn is getting into the sales people tooling space, and this guy whose company we just acquired that deeply understands salespeople, who has founder level DNA, but also has demonstrated that they can move metrics we care about. So he's like one of us. Like, he understands the culture of what we care about. He understands the mainland. We can send him off on an expedition and know that he will bring our DNA with him to this new place and understand he will have the sensitivities required to figure out how it integrates. He'll be able to speak the same language as everyone else when it's time to incorporate it. Do you think that's how is that mindset necessary? Because for 0 to 1 work, in your view, is like that almost like all of those ingredients have to be in place, like long-term leadership level conviction that this is absolutely a space we need to be in, and then like this measured level of impatience with kind of like results.
Yeah, I think this getting the executive team bought off on the vision and the narrative is so critical to create the rope and the space you need to iterate, to go figure out what's going to work. And I think this is something, frankly, I see a lot of PMs under investing in, where they're like, oh, I got to go do the exec rounds. I got to go convince them of this thing. I just want to go build. Why can't I just go build? But it turns out I spent a lot of time with the exec team finding a narrative that resonated with as many of them as possible, right? And it was critical, and frankly ended up being one of my superpowers. And, some people sort of simplify this as the sort of political BS that you have to deal with in organizations, but I don't see it that way. I think this is the work of being a great product leader, is actually going and rallying the troops around a vision and getting them to share and get bought off on that vision. And then me enabling my team to fire on all cylinders to go iterate and find something that's actually going to work in the market, right? And that is the leadership role. And I think some people often struggle with sort of moving into leadership roles in product because they don't realize that's part of the job, or don't accept that is a core dynamic. And I think you're right in that in order for me to get around the sort of short-term metrics orientation, selling the vision and getting the leadership bought off was a key piece of that.
Yeah. It's almost...
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. No, I was going to say, like, the image that was coming to mind for me is, I don't know if you've seen the movie Air, where it's all about how they started the Air Jordan, brand at Nike. And, you've got like Matt Damon is basically like this leader internally who's convinced like we need to make a shoe, like we need to be a player in the shoe space. And you've got Phil Knight who's running, played by Ben Affleck, and he's like this is never going to work. Like, we shouldn't do this. Nike's not blah, blah, blah. And And so, but what was coming to mind is like the amount of like every conversation that Matt Damon has in that movie with Ben Affleck, who's his boss in the movie, is not Matt Damon playing not to lose. It's Matt Damon playing to win. And he's like, he comes into every one of those. He's like he's supercharged, super passionate. My neck's on the line. Fire me if this doesn't work, right? Like, and I think that it's so rare to have that level of conviction in the workplace that someone really like. I'll admit, I would definitely go into leadership reviews sometimes when I was less excited about the problem I was working on because of whatever reorgs put me in a place that I didn't necessarily sign up to be in. And I'm like, I'm going in a leadership review because I'm here. I don't know, like I'm playing defense. I'm not playing offense. And I think what I'm
you're just
trying
to get that check mark.
Yeah, like it did it. Now, like you said, let me get back to building. Let me get back to doing my day-to-day job. But I don't think I can. I self-diagnose as not having been very excited about those conversations because I wasn't excited about what I was pitching or promoting. And I think it's good to be in an environment where you're really excited about what you're working on so that you could do the kind of high caliber work you're talking about.
Yeah. You know, one kind of aside or related to that is because I built this connected product for salespeople and I built Sales Navigator for salespeople, I've spent a lot of time with salespeople, right? And it turns out actually product people don't spend that much time with salespeople. And so there's so much skill that goes into crafting a narrative that you could need to get to resonate with your client to actually sell a product effectively, and spend a lot of time thinking about that. And so it's sort of this, I've internalized this skill, and what you realize is everything is selling. Everything is selling. We're selling our products to customers, and we're trying to deliver experience that's going to be delightful, that they love. We're trying to convince executives of things. We're trying to convince someone to join our team. Everything we're doing is selling. And, you know, I do think it's one of these undervalued skills in product because we sort of think, hey, we should be building. Like, why are we doing all this other stuff?
Well, one thing that I want to make sure we hit, and maybe we'll tee it off as a part two, but, you know, we've talked maybe about one of the buzziest words in the AI age, which is taste. I think probably a close second place is human in the loop. But I think they're both connected, right? Like I think probably the people that are getting the most leverage out of these tools are applying good taste to when to insert themselves into the workflow in the right leverage point. So I'm curious, like, yeah, like you've taught a bunch of courses, you've done workshops for companies. Like, what have you learned about like the right way to think about like inserting yourself in workflows when working with AI?
You know, I think it's one of these interesting things where AI is incredible and there's so much value it's bringing to the product workflows. Everything from customer insights, synthesizing feedback really quickly, to right now, I don't have to write SQL anymore because it writes all my SQL. It goes and grabs the data from the database, creates incredible visualizations for me. Prototyping is obviously an incredible use case. And product strategy, I found ways to use it as an incredible way to up-level my product strategy. So there's so many use cases where AI is incredible. Now, what's fascinating is there's this whole desire to take it to the next level through agents. And you see people talking about this online. We're like, hey, look, I gave AI a bunch of customer feedback, and then I told it, hey, go synthesize that into a spec, then go generate a prototype based on that spec, and then go put that in front of customers, get some feedback, and go and then iterate based on that feedback. And I get how this vision is so beautiful and so amazing. And yet, I don't think most people who are tweeting about this have ever tried it, because I've tried it and it's terrible. It is literally low quality AI slop that comes out of the other end. And I would never show this work to anyone, right? And so it doesn't take away from the idea that AI is amazing. And I use AI every day in all my workflows, but our over desire to automate the entire workflow is getting ahead of ourselves. The technology is not there yet. Will it ever be there? I don't know. But at least I feel in the next 5 years, a better way to use these tools is human in the loop AI. I use it for a particular task as a tool, and I can help guide it. And that's where you get really great results from AI. And the reason that matters, that human in the loop, is it allows me to apply my taste. It allows me to bring my taste into the equation for the specific task. So let me give you a couple examples to kind of make this real. One of the things I often demo in my class is how to write great executive communication using AI. And, it turns out like when the specific scenario I talk about is with Sales Navigator, when we were building Sales Navigator, we had to decide, do we build it as a standalone interface like LinkedIn Recruiter? So you go to a separate site to go use Sales Navigator, or do we build it on LinkedIn.com? So like a couple of modules unlock if you buy this. And we spent months debating this. We ultimately decided to create a standalone interface because we wanted to create a customized experience for sales professionals. But I had to communicate that decision to our executive team. And there was pros and cons. There was execs on either side of it. And so I was spending a lot of time. I spent a week writing one email. And so I then thought about, could we use AI if I were to revisit that decision to go do it? And when you first do the default thing, you get slop. What's the default thing? Okay, we had a meeting to discuss this decision. I take the meeting transcript. I have it, send it to Claude and say, hey, Claude, can you turn this into an executive level communication, communicating the decision that we made in this meeting and include pros and cons as well as the final outcome? Slop. I would never send that email out. It was generic. It wasn't compelling. And so then I talk about how could we make this useful? And so I apply my taste. And so I say, look, there's a bunch of writers I respect that are the greatest writers I've ever read. And so I go through an exercise of like, okay, let's look at Jeff Bezos. Here's a link to every single shareholder letter he's ever written. Can you create a style guide for me based on Jeff Bezos' writing, based on reading all of his writing? I tell that to Claude, and Claude comes back with an incredible style guide on what makes Jeff, Jeff. And this was amazing because I had intuited what I love about his writing, but I couldn't articulate it as well as Claude articulated how good his writing was. And his writing was fantastic. And the style definition, like he always starts with day one. He uses colloquial language, but is still very choiceful about particular words. It had all these dimensions of its writing. And so then I said, hey, great. Using the style guide for Jeff Bezos, write the memo. And oh my God, I got such compelling writing for this memo. And there's a lot of phrases in there. I'm like, oh, that's good. Yeah, that's I got to put that in there. And so I did that. And then I did the same thing with Paul Graham. I'm like, hey, another one of my favorite writers on the internet is Paul Graham. So write me a style guide for Paul Graham, and gave me the style guide. And then I said, rewrite the memo in the style of Paul Graham. And this part, I didn't realize Paul Graham is all about metaphors and analogies. He finds ways to incorporate in his essays these really simple metaphors and analogies. And so it pointed this out in the style guide. And so then I asked Claude to write a memo based on that style guide. So good. I'm trying to remember a couple of phrases. It said things like, if we're trying to create the best home for sales for sales professionals, we can't have them living in someone else's house. We need to create our own home for sales professionals. And it had so many of these good phrases that I'm like, this is going to punch up my memo. And so then what do? I take these different choiceful phrases and I don't just copy one of them. I put them together in a memo, taking some bits from Bezos, some Bezos bits from Paul Graham, and some of the other influences. And I get a really high quality memo that I couldn't have written myself, but that I'm proud to share. And so that's what I mean by human in the loop, leveraging my taste for what great writing looks like, telling it to Claude, and then it's still doing a lot of the heavy lifting, right? The fact that it came up with metaphors and analogies that were appropriate for selling the Sales Navigator standalone or integrated decision is kind of over the top. And it shows the power of AI, but it also shows why I needed to be in the loop to get that sort of quality results.
Yeah, this really resonates. I also think there is, what I've learned with AI is that the more specific the job to be done for that specific prompt, the better results you'll get. And there's almost like a taste element of knowing which job to be done to sequence. And you have to have done like that thing from 0 to 1 before in order to know what great looks like, right? Like for another example of like executive communication that to me has always been very top of mind is, for me, it's always like, hey, how can I have a better discussion and like almost have the most interesting, like trade-off conversation when we're meeting the execs. And something that's always been very helpful for me is like putting myself in the shoes of the executive and like what they care about. And then kind of telling Claude, be like, hey, like this person really cares about this. Let's pretend you're this person and this is your responsibility. And here's what here's like the KPIs you're hold accountable in front of the board. What kind of questions would you be asking me that I'm not basically proactively telling you in this write-up? And then that would be either I could choose, okay, maybe that's too detailed, but I should have a answer ready to go, or actually I should just go ahead and proactively incorporate it because I think it's going to push the conversation forward. But I think, all these things, again, it's very different from just, can you make this prompt? Can you make this, like exec communication better versus like just pinpointing the different things that you want to get done?
I'm guessing that executive update you ended up sending had to have some commentary on metrics in order to resonate. Like, it's like, I know the audience will care about metrics. Here's my draft. How can I incorporate metrics into the story, right?
That's right. Yeah. And like, there's so many ways to think about metrics. You can think about it in terms of TAM, right? Like I talked a lot about in my narrative around how many sales professionals are already on LinkedIn. How engaged are they with our other paid products? How can we take the behavior that they're already doing, which will be, and make it better in this like sales product? And so it was a very metrics data driven argument, of course, knowing my audience. It's interesting because we got so strategic at LinkedIn that ultimately I was like, okay, there's a couple of key execs that need to be convinced to greenlight Sales Navigator. There's the CEO, there's the VP of product, there's the VP of design, there's the CFO. And, it turned out at LinkedIn, those were the key executives. Each is completely different in their own sensibilities around taste, right? Our VP of product and VP of design cared a lot about the experience. They wanted to see what this thing would look like, and versus like the metrics orientation that the CEO had. And so we had to figure out multiple arguments around doing this. I gave this talk a few years ago around making a compelling argument and sort of breaking down exactly this process of figure out who you're trying to convince, figure out their specific proclivities and what is winning arguments for them, incorporate into your narrative those specific arguments. And here's a set of different stylistic ways to go do that. And it's so interesting because I think it's, again, this selling thing where I'm breaking down selling to a formula that I think a lot of us as product people never experience or even think about, or don't even think about it as a skill to learn. And so, there's a lot here around influence with authority that ends up being sort of a skill you can develop.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And I don't take it for granted that, but like Sales Navigator now just seems like such an obvious win. Like it seems like such an obvious winner, but I can only imagine the amount of skepticism and just like status quo that you had to overcome to get people to like see it. And even though now in hindsight, it's so obvious, right?
I still remember what happened. We had this strategic offsite at LinkedIn. It was called Project X, where LinkedIn at the time was doing a few billion and was thinking about how do we get to 10 billion in revenue. And so it was sort of forward looking at what's the next big strategic bet we could take. And I got invited to go present this whole, maybe we should build a sales product thing. But then there was lots of other presentations. And this was done to not only the entire executive team, but the entire board. So Reid Hoffman was there and lots of other luminaries were there. And the ideas were wild, right? And so like Sales Navigator was my little pitch. There was this whole idea that maybe we should do something in L&D. And now we know they acquired Lynda, they created LinkedIn Learning. None of that existed at the time. And I'd say, honestly, both of them seemed pretty wild at the time. Like, oh, the sales thing, maybe. This L&D thing, maybe. And there was other ideas. There was like this whole biz dev thing we were going to do and a couple of different ideas. And we were all making our pitch to see who would ultimately get funded. Now,
so you were doing this on the side while you had like a main job at LinkedIn? You were like on the side pitching this thing, or was this like your main thing at the time?
Yeah, so what happened was Sales Navigator at the time was what was considered a venture initiative, which is Sachin, a couple of designers and a couple of engineers in a corner building a startup. No one was expecting this thing to work. There was no revenue tied to it. And I was like, cool, I get to build a little startup inside of LinkedIn. Now, what happened was I was doing that as like a fun little project inside the company. And then I got asked to present at Project X. And I didn't know anything about it. I didn't want to spend that much time on it. I just took what we were doing in terms of our validation exercise and brought it to this conversation. And what's interesting was, I'll tell you what was compelling about my pitch. Everyone else had a typical TAM-based analysis. Look, L&D, here's the hundreds of billions of dollars of spend in L&D. Here's why LinkedIn is uniquely positioned. Like a McKinsey-style presentation of why one might go and build something in this business. Because I didn't want to distract myself with this Project X thing, I was in the busy doing customer validation. And so we were doing waves of customer validation. We had created a full click-through prototype of the actual product. And so our designer was creating different mocks. And by the time we got to this offsite, I was on like wave 3, meaning that we had talked to 10 customers, shown them these mock-ups of what the product could look like, gotten feedback, incorporated it, did that 3 times over. And so what I got to present was, I'm like, oh man, I was looking at the other decks. I'm like, I don't have these fancy graphs. But what I do have is literally screen mock-ups of what the product's going to look like and quotes from the Apple sales team, from the JP Morgan sales team, from all these sales teams to being like, wow, we like this. We would make this our homepage instead of Salesforce because this feels like a better place for a salesperson to live. And I had like a dozen of those quotes. And here's the amazing thing. I then, in the last minute, tried to create a slide around TAM, like what's the market opportunity? Because I'm like, I guess I need one of these. And it was very underwhelming because here's the interesting thing. We were trying to define this new market that at best you could call sales intelligence, maybe sales acceleration. And at the time, the number 1 market in spend was CRM, which was all the money. The number 2 market was data providers like Hoovers and D&B. So you buy some data. Outside of that, if you take any other sales tool in the entire market, it added to maybe 50 million in annual spend. Nothing, right? Like LinkedIn doesn't get into markets for like 50 million. And so that's all I could point to. And my argument was like, look, we have customers today clamoring for this mock-up based prototype product. Here's what they're saying. They're saying they'll use it. And yes, I can only point to $50 million of existing spend because this is a new market opportunity. This is what new market opportunities look like. You can't point at existing spend. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a new market opportunity. But if we can accelerate sales for these folks, we will create dollars because it's tied to revenue.
We're going to grow the pie.
We're going to grow the pie, right? And because sales people are going to sell more money, we're close to the revenue, they're going to be willing to give us part of that pie. And so that was the pitch. And, I didn't know what to expect from it. But the amazing thing is literally after that presentation, Sales Navigator went from a venture project, me building a startup in a quarter, to a strategic project, meaning this is really important. This is going to be the next bastion of growth for the company. And by the way, that came with a insane deadline of when we needed to launch the product, but a lot more resources. We grew the team really quickly. And it's fascinating because the biggest pushback I got on that meeting was, look, L&D, hundreds of billions of dollars you could point to here. These other markets, very large. I just don't see the market. But what the executive team ultimately decided was like, Sachin's product is like basically real. Like he knows exactly what he's going to build. He has customers who've already told him what he's going to build is what they want. These other things around we should do something in L&D, but we don't really know exactly what that's going to look like, feels like a longer term bet versus this feels like something that could produce real results in the near term. And so it was like a fascinating sort of storyline of how this got funded. To your point, it wasn't obvious, though it is in hindsight, that this was going to be the big sort of lever.
Well, I think the reason it seems obvious in hindsight, knowing what I know now at LinkedIn's current scale, is that, well, one, selling is not that different than recruiting. Like the way you do outbound to someone you're trying to recruit is not that different than the way you might want to think about doing outbound to someone you want to sell to. And then the second thing that's now obvious is everyone's going to be on LinkedIn. So everyone that is running a business is going to be on LinkedIn, and everyone who is doing a job will be on LinkedIn. And so who does sales? People who are running a business / hold a sales job at a company, to other people who are who either run a business and need that product, or people who are employed at a company and need that product, or just regular people who need a product. And therefore, if you can allow someone to leverage all of the design patterns associated with recruiting, but in the context of sales and everyone's already there, all you have to do is give people a chance to consume it if they're not a recruiter and they're just trying to like do sales, right? And like obviously tailor the product to the sales use case, but that's why it seems obvious in hindsight now, right?
Yeah, but it almost created like the new category of like social selling, right? Of like what happens like when LinkedIn becomes a social network, right? And all of a sudden this person that you follow, that you've been consuming their content, that they've been giving value, then can come in and use that profile, that identity, and sell it to you. That's also like
But at
really,
that
really
point,
powerful.
but at that point, if I'm not mistaken, was LinkedIn even like remotely like a place where people are like posting content and like, you know, like having like that wasn't like a thing.
It was
back
like
then,
Medium.
right?
I remember Medium was the place where
Yeah.
I go consume a lot of the content. Like I don't on Twitter, but yeah, like
Totally. It wasn't. The whole sort of content ecosystem hadn't emerged at that point. And what was interesting is, to your point, Mark, that not only did we had to build the product, but we had to sell the use case. And so we spent a lot of time on this concept of social selling, just like you said. We sort of coined the term and built out a lot of education around it. And, you know, we used all the typical tactics. We talked about FOMO, right? The traditional way of selling, cold calling, where you spam 100 people, maybe get 1 or 2 replies, is only getting worse because people are not responding to cold outreaches. And so you have to find a way to warm it up. You have to find a way to target the right buyer, go in with a communication that's personalized to them. And so we started making these pillars of this concept of social selling. And, you know, one of the things I'm most proud of that our sales team really pioneered was how we went and made the pitch. And so we came up with social selling, and not just as a amorphous concept, but we then created what we called the social selling index, which is a way to take any person on LinkedIn and measure how effective was that salesperson at using LinkedIn to social sell. We'd be looking, are they using advanced search filters to target the right buyer? Are they using in-mails and personalizing those emails to reach out to people? Are they reading the status updates from a prospect and then using that as fodder in their conversation? And so these are things we could actually measure in the experience. And so we come up with a score, and we let a salesperson look at it and then learn, how do you improve your score? Here's additional things you could be doing using LinkedIn to do. Now, what's great about it is we can measure your social selling index both on the free product and the paid product, and we can aggregate it across your company. Here's how your salespeople do as a company. How this turned into a really effective sales pitch was we go to a company and be like, hey, IBM, we don't want to really sell you something, but we just want to help you understand how's your sales team doing. And oh, by the way, we'll show you the social selling index for not only your employees, but let me show you the social selling index for a couple of your competitors and how they're doing. And now you're going in with a educational pitch on like, hey, look, you guys are okay at social selling. Let me tell you what the best of breed social sellers that you're competing with are doing using tools like LinkedIn more effectively. And yeah, we have a product called LinkedIn Sales Navigator that's going to make this really easy for you to go do. And that personalized pitch really got conversations that we wouldn't have gotten if we just showed up to the door with another product to sell.
It's
Well, I think
education
that's-
plus FOMO.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
One thing that's surprising, given what we talked about, and I personally use Sales Nav, is that I'm actually surprised at how little metrics there are in the product. Like, you know, there's very little like metrics around like, you know, like how many like DMs have you sent, or like what is your reply rate, or things like that. And I'm curious, like, was that a constraint, or was that just something that just never got prioritized, or because for a company that's super data driven.
This is a great question, and frankly, a great case study in taste, right? So I think here's the thing. Let me tell you what our number 1 and number 2 feature requests always were for Sales Navigator. Number 1, hey, this in-mail thing is kind of annoying. Can you just give me the email address so I can email like each of these prospects? And number 2 was, okay, this data in LinkedIn is really useful, but my boss wants me to put it all in Salesforce. So can you just export this data to Salesforce so I have it all tracked with it? Now, 100% reasonable requests for a salesperson, but something we vowed never to do. And because we knew the reason the whole network worked was members contribute their data, they willingly give all this rich profile data. Now, there's a couple of ways that people are using it. Recruiters use to reach out to you, which is flattering. Now, if a salesperson is reaching out to you and they got your email address because of LinkedIn, let me tell you, you're not updating LinkedIn anymore. It would have killed the very ecosystem that created the rich data that made us valuable to sales professionals. And so we said that is a line we will not cross. You're not going to get their email address. You're not going to be able to export your data. Members would not want that. Your ability to search for members and message them is predicated on the fact that members willingly give us that data. And so we kept a really high taste bar that we're not going to stoop that low. And it's what made the ecosystem work. Now, we also instituted lots of limits on number of in-mails you can send, both in terms of the numbers you can send, because we didn't want you spamming people in the network. Also, the number of in-mail messages a recipient could receive. Because if one buyer is receiving 100 in-mails, again, he's going to not want to be on LinkedIn. Now, these limitations frustrated salespeople. But again, we knew what the crown jewel was, which was member contributed data that created the profile completeness that salespeople loved. We could never do anything to erode that. And those kinds of feature requests, even though they were frequent, would have eroded that member trust.
Yeah, it's almost like you got to protect both sides of the marketplace. And yeah, and even, things like metrics of like, hey, like you reached out to like 100 people this week or things like that. It sounds also like the reason why you're not showing that data is too because maybe you don't want to incentivize like volume instead of you want to incentivize quality and maybe relevance as opposed to.
That's right. Yeah. Like we had even done studies where like 100 cold outreaches results in 1 to 2 responses. 10 extremely warm outreaches, maybe you have a mutual connection, maybe you customized it based on really researching that person, could get 2 to 3 responses. And so we often sold social selling is not the volume game. Cold calling is a volume game. We are the quality game. And here's what you need to do. And we wanted to disincentivate like any sort of volume-based activity in the product. And so now we did have metrics around the social selling index doing the kinds of things that resulted in high quality interactions, right? Like you're researching someone before a meeting and those kinds of things. And we also tried to do metrics in terms of, for enterprise customers, we would help generate a report that actually showed you, for example, for all the deals that you did in the last quarter, how many were influenced by LinkedIn because of the fact you found the prospect on LinkedIn, you reached out to them on LinkedIn, you researched them on LinkedIn to try to get like, how much is LinkedIn impacting your sales? But we were very sensitive to volume-based metrics.
Yeah, so interesting. Well, I mean, I know we're coming up on an hour and a half. I feel like I could keep going, but this might be a place to start to wrap. This is really helpful. I think like developing taste. My biggest takeaway, I think, from the conversation on the taste development side, I think, is to be very sensitive to what inspires me, to be very mindful of what I choose to consume from a content perspective, to get better at articulating what I like and don't like about certain experiences and what the thought process might have been on the builder side for like why they made those trade-offs. And then in this case of the Sales Navigator use case, my biggest takeaway from this part of the conversation is just like, one, how important it is to deeply understand the customer that you're trying to build for and how powerful of ammunition that can be in creating a compelling argument to fund something. And also just to like, to do whatever you need to do to build your own conviction that something is worth pursuing, because I don't think what you can convince anyone else if you're not convinced. And it sounds like you had zero doubt that this was going to be a big win. And man, I strive to just work on more and more things that I have high amounts of conviction about, because I know that if I can get conviction, it's really, selling is easy when you have conviction about something, I think. But as far as like the human in the loop piece, yeah, no doubt. Like we just had, Mark and I had a talk yesterday. We did a live podcast recording with Jacob Bank, who runs relay.app, and did a whole deep dive into, the importance of building your team, hiring your team of AI agents. And I think Jacob has, like, they literally have a part of the product called Human in the Loop. It's like an actual dedicated section of AI workflow builders, and it's critical to have that. So
yeah. It's almost like you shouldn't fully delegate something that you cannot decompose into a formula. That's, to me, like the different elements. Like, you can delegate different parts of the formula where it can help you, but I think just hoping that it just does it all for you. And so I think there's still like an importance of like doing things from scratch, really learning how the sausage is made. And then once you have that, you can choose and pick what steps of the sausage making you get help with.
Yeah. Cool. Well, in closing, Sachin, if people want to learn more about what you're thinking about these days, stay in touch. Where can they go to learn more? And then 2, is there anything that the audience can do to be helpful to you in any way?
LinkedIn's definitely the best place to follow me. I'm constantly posting my thoughts on AI and product management and how AI is transforming with this new capability of AI that we have. So it's definitely the place to follow me. And if you're interested in diving deeper, in particular in AI for PMs, I have a course, AI Productivity, on Reforge that I'd encourage you to check out.
Amazing. We'll add all those links to the show notes. But yeah, thank you so much for making the time. This has been awesome.
Yeah, awesome. This has been fun.
Amazing. That's a wrap.